In 1942, a reverend from Hampshire created stories of 3 railway engines to entertain his son while he was struggling with measles. Little did he know, 80 years after publishing his first book, that those silly little trains would become cultural icons. Yep, if you could believe it, Thomas the Tank Engine and his friends have been around for 8 decades, delighting audiences of all ages with its lovable characters, whimsical setting, timeless stories, and endearing morals. The creative minds of Reverend Audrey, Britt Allcroft, David Mitten, and several other talented people have turned this little blue tank engine into a household name. And it seems like everyone of every generation has had some kind of connection to Thomas over the past 80 years, including me. I've mentioned in my Britt Allcroft tribute video earlier this year that Thomas was a big part of my childhood, and that even though I've stopped consistently watching it, I still cherish the memories and time I had with it. So today, in honor of the franchise's 80th anniversary, I'm going to be taking a look at a subsection of Thomas that has mostly passed me by. The movies. While Magic Railroad is the most infamous and gets talked about the most, there have been 13 other Thomas movies that have released since then. Many of them have even gotten serious theatrical releases, and I want to go through all of them to see what I've been missing out on. I know several other bigger YouTubers have already done this type of video, but I wanted to experience these movies myself. I honestly have no clue what to expect, since a lot of these were made during the CGI era and have a pretty bad reputation. But much like the Barbie movies, I'm going to keep an open mind and see if any of these are actually good. So, climb aboard as I take a look at every Thomas the Tank Engine movie. I've already talked about this movie multiple times, so I'll try to keep this brief. I grew up with this movie, so I have a soft spot for it, but it's not a good movie, and it's definitely not a good representation of the show. The plot is insane, the acting is inconsistent in tone, and for a Thomas the Tank Engine movie, it is severely lacking in Thomas the Tank Engine. I know this was Britt Allcroft's passion project, and it sucks that this was such a detriment to her career, but she really missed the mark with this, and for Thomas's first major theatrical outing, this was a major letdown. Calling All Engines was a feature-length special released in 2005 to celebrate the 60th anniversary of Thomas and Friends. It mainly focuses on the steam engines and the diesels having to put aside their prejudice to help with the construction of a new airport. I also grew up with this special, but I guess I had forgotten most of it. Rewatching it, it was honestly kinda boring. I understand it's a kid's show and it doesn't need to be the deepest thing in the world, but it just kind of meanders along and goes from one situation to another. It feels more like a series of episodes loosely strung together rather than a feature-length movie, not helped by the abrupt breaks for interactive games and songs. They also bring back Diesel 10 and Lady from the Magic Railroad, but I guess not wanting to completely reopen that old wound, they never address any of the events from the movie. They also don't really contribute much. Lady only appears to Thomas in a dream as this heavenly train ex machina that offers him the answers and doesn't physically interact with the other engines. It feels like they were just put in for recognition and nothing else. The movie isn't terrible, it's just kind of there. I'm sure I loved it as a kid, but as an adult, it was mostly just dull. The Great Discovery was released in 2008 and marks the end of an era for Thomas, as it was the final movie to be made entirely with live-action models. Unlike Calling All Engines, you can really tell they were trying to make this feel like a movie. The story was a bit bigger, there were more ambitious set pieces, they even got Pierce Brosnan to be the narrator. Now, I never watched this movie when I was younger, but I did see the trailer a few times. So how was it? It was pretty decent. It was definitely a step above Calling All Engines and Magic Railroad, but it wasn't amazing either. Pierce Brosnan made for a pretty good narrator. He came off very soft and peaceful, like he was reading a bedtime story, but still played up the energy in the action bits. Speaking of, I thought there were some really good set pieces, like the bridge and the mine. The conflict with Thomas being jealous of Stanley was fine, it just kinda seemed like a retread of the previous special, only less racist. And overall, I thought it was a cute little movie. If I watched it as a kid, I probably would have loved it. There's also a rap at the end credits, so you know it's good.
Thomas is not a toy.
Mattel would like a word with you. Hero of the Rails was released in 2009 and was the first of the Thomas movies to be made entirely in CGI. I stopped watching the show long before they made this switch, so I already kind of had a bias that the CGI iteration was somehow worse. And after watching the movie, while I don't think the CGI is bad, it will still take some getting used to. And I still miss the models. And honestly, I feel like this movie could have been made using models. I understand it allows them to move the faces and show more of the environments and get more dynamic shots, but there really isn't anything in this movie that would be too outlandish or difficult to do in live action. It really feels like an extended episode of the series. The plot doesn't really scream movie to me. It's just Thomas finding an old engine named Hero and trying to fix him in secret so he doesn't get scrapped. Outside of the ending and opening credits, it didn't really feel all that special. It was honestly just kind of boring. Misty Island Rescue was released in 2010 and it was pretty dull. The story wasn't super interesting, the new characters they introduced are kind of annoying, the island itself, outside of the logging town, is kind of boring, and for whatever reason the story was told in rhyme, but only half the time. It felt very inconsistent and pointless. Of all the movies so far, this is the one I have the least to say about, because I was just kind of waiting for it to be over. This whole steamy versus diesel race war is getting kinda old. Day of the Diesels was released in 2011, and so far of these movies, this one is the worst. It's pretty much a recycled version of Calling All Engines, except it involves Thomas acting way out of character, ignoring Percy, and causing him to make friends with the Diesels. And after being essentially groomed by Diesel 10, who sounds like fucking Calamitous from Jimmy Neutron.
Hello, Percy. Diesel said you might come to visit.
He allows them to take over the Sodor repair center where they wreak havoc. Not only is the plot really overused, but like I said, it relies on everyone acting woefully out of character and being either assholes or stupid. Thomas is pretty cruel in this movie, and Percy clearly has separation anxiety, so what did anyone expect was going to happen? And the whole issue is resolved when Sir Topham Hatt says building a new diesel works takes time, and then immediately has them get to work on it. So it seems like he was deliberately dragging his feet on this project just so the engines could learn this lesson. But yeah, this movie sucked. It was very poorly written, made some very poor character choices, and it was also pretty boring and hard to watch. I feel like I've been talking in circles with these past few movies. Blue Mountain Mystery was released in 2012, and after Day of the Diesels, anything will look like an improvement. And there are some decent things in this movie. The animation, I feel like, has improved a bit, and it's nice getting more of the narrow gauge engines. But beyond that, the movie falls into the trap of once again being really simplistic, kinda boring, and heavily reliant on characters withholding information solely so the plot can happen. It wasn't bad, it was just kinda mid. I think this is the first decent one of these since Great Discovery. King of the Railway was released in 2013, and I don't know if it's because the previous few have been really bad or that this was an actually really good movie, but I actually kind of liked this one. It was honestly kind of charming. It's nice getting some more history of the island of Sodor. I thought the story, while simple, was pretty fun. I liked Steven and his whole journey of being really outdated but still wanting to be useful. I was honestly expecting when the Earl showed up that the reason he was so gung-ho about finding the King's Crown was because he wanted money and or power and that he would turn out to be a villain. Honestly, that may have been me thinking too hard about it. But no, he just genuinely wanted to reopen the castle to the public to preserve the island history. I thought that was pretty refreshing. But yeah, while the movie for sure isn't perfect, I'd actually recommend giving this a watch. It wasn't that bad. Tales of the Brave was released in 2014, and I like this one too. I don't think it needed to be an hour-long movie. I feel like the story really only had enough material for a 30-minute special. But beyond that, it was still pretty good and charming. The story centers around Thomas and Percy being convinced that there's a monster on Sodor, and Percy learns through the course of the film to be brave. I don't know if this was meant as a Halloween special, but if it was, I think it was effective. I think the classic era of Thomas had better Halloween specials and creepier visuals, but This one had some cool sequences, and of course the moral fit very well. I like the new characters that were in this movie. Gator is an engine visiting from another area, and him and Percy both go through an arc of conquering their fears, which was really nice. Olivia Colman is in this movie as this overly chatty digger engine, and she was hilarious. Like I said, it could have been a bit shorter, but other than that, I thought it was pretty good. Out of all the movies in this lineup, this was the one I was most interested in watching, and it did not disappoint. The Adventure Begins was released in 2015 and is an adaptation of the first few Railway series books made to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the series. I personally have more nostalgia for the TV series than the books, but if you're a fan of either, this movie will charm the pants off of you. It feels very classic. It adapts these stories really well and strings them together into a cohesive narrative. While I prefer the model era, the animation in this movie is some of the best in the series and feels very cinematic. There are so many tributes and callbacks, from the remixes of Mike O'Donnell's original soundtrack to the ending credits illustrations to even some of the voices. You can't tell me that the guy voicing Sir Topham Hatt doesn't sound like Ringo Starr. It was a very lovingly made throwback, and if you watch any movie in this lineup, watch The Adventure Begins. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure was also released in 2015, and for whatever reason, they crammed a shit ton of star power into this movie. Olivia Colman returns as Marion, and she's great as always. But there's also Eddie Redmayne, Jamie Campbell Bower, bloody John Hurt. I guess because this movie was also released to tie into the 70th anniversary, they wanted to make it extra special. If The Adventure Begins was a nice, quaint tribute to Thomas's origin, then this was a big cinematic adventure with celebrity voice talent. And I thought it was pretty good. The celebrity guests are mostly unrecognizable. The animation is particularly good here. There are a lot of striking backgrounds and fun chase sequences. The story is fun, but isn't afraid to go dark at points. And the villain was actually really effective. It's not often you see a human villain in Thomas, but Sailor John was pretty solid. He is what P.T. Boomer would have been had he not been cut and had they given more time to flesh him out. Overall, I was really impressed by this movie. I'd probably consider it my second favorite Thomas movie in this lineup. Definitely would recommend. The Great Race, even though the racing aspect only takes up a small portion of the story, was released in 2016 and feels like a retread of one of the earlier Thomas movies I've covered. The story centers around Thomas wanting to compete in this upcoming railway show and him being jealous that he keeps getting overlooked. He keeps trying to change things about himself so that he has a better chance of being selected, but then he realizes that he just needs to be himself. It's a nice message and everything, but I feel like Thomas has learned this same type of lesson like 5 separate times already. It wasn't as egregious as some of the other movies, but still. I like the new character, Ashima. I thought she was really cool. I think it's funny that her VA is from Sense8, which is probably the furthest thing from Thomas you can get. The movie is a musical, which I was a little iffy on at first, but the songs aren't bad. And yeah, it's not as good as Lost Treasure or Adventure Begins, but I thought it was still decent. What the hell did I just watch? Journey Beyond Sodor was released in 2007 and is hands down the most insane Thomas movie I have ever seen. The story is basically Thomas wants to be seen as the favorite, so he steals James's car to take to the mainland. And Sir Topham Hatt has no problem with this because he can just swap around engines and their positions however he pleases. Anyway, Thomas gets lost and winds up at this steel mill where these 2 engines essentially trap him and make him do slave labor. He eventually escapes, but meanwhile, James goes out to look for Thomas, and he ends up trapped in the steel mill, and then Thomas has to bust him out. Watching this movie felt like a fever dream. Having a Thomas movie essentially be a prison break story was a bold choice to say the least, and seeing how the 2 engines treat him really sucks. But then you remember, don't these trains have drivers? I know these engines are semi-autonomous and can move freely wherever they want, but there are still humans inside them that can control them, so Why didn't Thomas's driver play more of a role in breaking him out? Hell, why didn't the driver figure out the directions before they set off for the mainland? There are also humans working at the steel mill. Shouldn't they be putting the kibosh on these two engines, or are they basically prison labor too? Along Thomas's adventure, he meets these 3 experimental engines, basically engines who are made weird and don't work the way they're supposed to. They're kind of like the logging engines from Misty Island Rescue, only slightly less annoying. They end up helping Thomas break James out of prison, and right at the last minute, the 2 villains start whining about how they have no one to help them and they have so much work. And instead of them just saying, "Fuck off, you tried to keep us prisoner," Thomas just volunteers these engines to work at the steel mill so that him and James can go home safely. And then everyone sings a song about friendship at the end, and I'm like, what the fuck, dude? These guys just helped you out, and in return, you just sold them into slavery? Jesus, I guess their Topham Hatt has a bigger influence on these engines than we all thought. This movie is weird and all over the place, but in kind of an entertaining way. It's definitely too long, and the songs were a little worse than the songs from Great Race. The animation is a bit of a mixed bag. Some of the lighting and backgrounds are well done, but I didn't like the bounciness of the characters. It felt a bit too Chuggington for my taste. I also kind of liked the brotherly dynamic between Thomas and James, and I wish that were explored a bit more. Overall, this movie is a mess, but it was an entertaining mess. I'd recommend checking it out for the weird factor, but if you want a good Thomas movie, this ain't it. Sorry. Last and certainly least, Big World, Big Adventures was released in 2018, and it is exactly what it sounds like. Thomas takes a trip around the world and comes across new friends and crazy adventures. And it's movies like this that make you remember, oh right, this is a children's show made to sell toys. Mattel took this series in a very different direction, making it more action-heavy, more cartoony, and more kiddie. Which I get is the target audience, but still. This is a far cry from the quaint little stories of the classic era. The movie itself is pretty lame. The songs are all pretty bad. The characters are all kind of obnoxious. The one funny thing in the entire movie was seeing Sir Topham Hatt with a new hat at each continent. Beyond that, it was way too long, very dull, and a very lackluster note to end this series on. So there you have it. Those are all the feature-length Thomas movies released from 2000 to 2018. I hope you guys enjoyed hearing my thoughts. If you want to know how I ranked these movies from best to worst, my Letterboxd ranking should be on the screen right now. This was a very interesting binge, to say the least. I brought up the Barbie video in the intro, and it's a valid comparison. Even though I had more of a connection and a frame of reference with Thomas than I did Barbie, I had the same mindset that a lot of the movies, or at least the CGI ones, would be not good. But I was surprised to find a few that I actually liked. It just shows what happens when you get people who actually care about what they're making. In terms of Thomas's theatrical future, there is a movie in the works at Mattel with Mark Forster set to direct. Not very much is known about it, so it's hard to know what to expect, but I did like Christopher Robin, so I'm curious to see what he does with Thomas. As long as it keeps to that childlike innocence that Christopher Robin or something like Paddington went for, and doesn't try to go for the edgy, self-referential route like Barbie, I think it has potential. Let me know in the comments, what did you think of these movies? Did you grow up with any of these? Which one's your favorite? Which one's your least favorite? And what would you like to see in a Thomas the Tank Engine movie? Let me know all that stuff down below. I've got more videos coming soon, but until then, be sure to like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you can stay up to date on when I'm posting. Follow me on all my social media, subscribe to my main channel. Everything you need to know will be in the description. Thank you guys for watching, and happy 80th anniversary, Thomas. You've been a really special engine. Thank you for the memories.
Shine.